In this two-part series, we interview author Sharon Chang to discuss her new book. In part 1, we discuss her mixed-truth story and how the book came to be. In part 2, we will discuss content from the book, including miseducation and the need for re-education around terminology and other racist phrases. We also touch on anti-bias curriculum, learning environments, and much more. Enjoy. Today we're going to be talking about your book that is going to be released soon called Raising Mixed Race, Multiracial Asian Children in a Post-Racial World. But before we get started, at Mixed Roots Stories, we always ask when we do podcasts, what is your mixed roots story? So that's what I want to start with.
Yeah. Let me think. There's always so many pieces to those stories, right?
Yes.
Well, my dad is from Taiwan. He came over when he was in his 20s. So he was born and raised and grew up completely in Taiwan. Did not speak, as far as I know, really any or very good English when he came here. And my mother is white American, fairly new American though, mostly Slovakian and then some French Canadian and German. They met on the East Coast, right around college years, and thus it begins.
Start with, what is some of the work you've done in the past and your educational background?
Okay, so I went to graduate school for human development, and I graduated with a master's in human development with an early childhood focus. During all of that time, I was an early childhood educator in various capacities, so sometimes a preschool teacher, sometimes a parent educator, administrator, and then also during that time I ended up becoming a mother. So we're going to talk about the education and then how I transitioned into this book.
Yes. Right? How did the idea for this book come about? How did the book come to be?
Absolutely. So this book actually grew from my master's thesis for that program. Right towards the end of doing my graduate work, it came to thesis writing time, and I had just had my son and was realizing that despite living my whole life as a mixed race person, I still had very few tools to raise a mixed race person myself. I had no answers, mostly questions. So I was scouring resources, parenting books, children's books, toys, TV, film, trying to find anything that would help us and affirm us and support us. And I just wasn't finding much. And it was really disappointing after, 3 decades living as a mixed person and supposedly the mixed population increasing so much, to see that there's still so little out there for us to support who we are, affirm who we are, and help us engage in conversations in this country. So I decided, I'm going to write my thesis on this. And I picked up my pen and paper, went out to the field, and probably interviewed, I think, around 20 or so parents for that first segment. And when I got that far, the thesis was pretty much done, but I thought, there's more here. I want to keep going. I reached out to some senior scholars, and one in particular, Joe R. Fagan, took a real interest in the project and really helped mentor me through turning it into a book. So for the book, I interviewed 68 parents that went back out into the field, 68 parents of young mixed race kids, mixed race Asian, and representing a total of 75 children. So thus the book was born. How I was born, how my book was born. It's all about birth.
It is about birth. It is about birth. Let's talk about your title choice. I know that there has been some questions on why you chose to include the in a post-racial world, and I'm really actually glad that you used it, because it really, for a lot of reasons, but I think it's going to suck people in because they think we're moving towards a post-racial world, and then you just slay that, and you're like, no, we are not there. But I want you to tell me about your choice and title.
Yeah, I like people in slaying a post-racial world.
Right.
Yeah, there was a lot of wordplay, I guess, if you will, in the title. I think also the word raising I was really excited about because of the multiple meanings that brings. It's been interesting to see what people project onto the title and subtitle of the book. So yeah, definitely the post-racial word has been super triggering for not a huge number of people yet, but we'll see what happens. There's this mythology around mixed race people that we are post-racial, and just by mere fact of our birth that we're going to solve all the problems of racism. There's a huge segment of society that believes that, and so that when they see the word post-racial and mixed race or multiracial in the same space, that's what comes up for them automatically. They don't question it. Then there's another segment of people who are really, really frustrated with that idea because clearly it's not true, right? We're not anywhere near a post-racial society, right. So they see that word, and that brings a lot of frustration and anger and all sorts of big feelings up for them, and they're not really sure what my standpoint is. And so, come at me in all kinds of ways, not having read the book. I think that's really great in a lot of senses, that there's this conflict, there's this word that we're super uncomfortable with, that we've projected all these meanings onto, and then we go into the book and we go on this journey. And my hope is always that people start asking a lot of questions about their miseducation, about where they've been going with ideas and words, particularly how loaded they are.
Yeah.
I do want to say, too, that the word raising also plays a similar role. I think a lot of people read that title as a parenting book only, like an advice book or a guidebook, which it does serve as that to some extent, but it's a lot more than that. I think people also read it as a celebrating multiculturalism and isn't mixed race beautiful and there's nothing else besides that. That sounds like it could be in the word. But I also, I love the piece about that word where it's raising things to the ground, like scrapping stuff and starting over. What are we going to bring up in its place? I think all of that is encompassed in the book. So yeah,
definitely. So some of this kind of goes to the statement you put out today about the recent news that came out about the Black Lives Matter protesters. And one thing that stood out to me in the book was I really appreciated that more than any other book that talks about mixed race stuff is you focus on white dominant rhetoric and how dismantling white supremacy is at the heart of raising children of color and how important that is to raising all children. More than any other book that I've seen on mixed stuff. And I do a lot of stuff in mixed stuff, so I've read a lot. I really appreciated this statement that you put out today, and I just wanted to know if you wanted to say anything about that.
It's along the same lines of what we're just talking about, right?
Yeah.
Where there's this huge multiracial mythology that much of the world, frankly, is buying into, where mixed race people are the end of racial problems. And when they see mixed race or multiracial, that's all that comes up for them in their mind.
Right.
And there's a lot of reasons why that's frustrating. It's invalidating of the racial experiences mixed race people have, right? It is a way to deflect or avoid dealing with. It's a way of using mixed race people as a lever to avoid dealing with the reality of racism. I have to kind of, in terms of my book, keep reminding people, like, don't make assumptions when you see the title of this book that we're going down that path of like, oh, mixed race kids are amazing and they're better looking than everyone else. End of story. That we are really trying to find a way to connect mixed race, identifying people to these larger conversations about anti-Black racism and white supremacy that are really the center of what's going on in the U.S. and globally, right? And everybody is involved in that conversation. So that really needs to be the heart of how we talk about race, period, whether it's mixed race or mono-race or whatever you want to call it. And that's often missing from mixed race conversations.
Yeah.
So I made a statement today about my book on Facebook where I said, please do remember that my book isn't about this tourist multiculturalism. Like, my book is about race. It's about critical race theory. It's about resisting racism and us getting engaged in the various ways that means for us, depending on whether we're light-skinned person, if we're blue. So,
yeah. And here is the statement. So you've talked a little bit about who the book is more than its title. Who would you say that you wrote this book for?
Good question. A lot of people, as many people as possible. I think in my head, if I recall, I had this narrative going, I am trying to positively impact the lives of mixed race Asian children. So whoever intersects critically with those kids, and that's not just going to be parents and caregivers, it's going to be relatives that they see a lot, it's going to be extended family, it's going to be friends, their own friends and their parent, caregiver, adult friends, it's going to be their educators, teachers, caregivers outside of the home, because a lot of these kids were young, so they were in daycare or had nannies. Also, people in the medical profession, young children go in a lot for care, checkups, immunizations. There were a lot of stories from doctors' offices about medical practitioners using really insensitive approaches to families. Administrators, I have noticed more and more recently, thankfully, that school administrators are starting to have a lot of attention on the issue of how to support mixed race kids, because it's a growing demographic. So this resource is for them too, and then also for researchers, because there is very little mixed race research. So I really wanted to do a research-driven project that would inspire other researchers to keep building. So academics as well, and then college, like incoming undergraduate level students are reflecting a lot on who they are, separate from their families of origin for the first time, or whatever family they grew up in. And that involves looking back to our childhoods, right? And thinking, oh, what happened when this thing occurred at 5 years old? How did I process that, and who did that make me how did that make me the person I am today? And that becomes a key component, like reflecting on our childhood in our early years. So I wanted those students to have this as a companion for their explorations as well.
So for everybody.
Yes, well, pretty much.
So as I was reading it, it's interesting that you break down all of those different groups, is because I was thinking this is for all parents for everybody. Parents of mixed race kids, parents of Asian children, Asian mixed race, of children of color. This is especially for children, white children. Like, I think it's really important to start young with white children kind of understanding these things as well. So I felt like this was for all parents. I was a school social worker for many, many years. And so working in the school system as a mixed person, or even a person of color, any question about a mixed race child came to me in the entire district, right? And so, and then I'm stuck going, wait, but I don't even know what is like best practice. Like, I can tell you from my own experience, I can tell you from what I've read, but so I was thinking this would be great for teacher trainings. I've done a discussion in the past on supporting multiracial students in schools with the School Social Work of America conference. It's the National School Social Work Conference. And I'm doing another one in the spring that's talking about from the parent's point of view and working with parents and not assuming that the parents look like the child. And you kind of talk about that whole matching thing a little bit. But then I also work in academia. So there were times where I was reading where I was like, this language is great for parents. But then there are times in the book where the language, I'm like, academics aren't going to discard this, because she's also writing with that academic language in some places so that they feel included as well, which is also that equal balance part. I could see it being used in a college classroom as well. So I think you've covered a nice arc of places.
I tried to write as wide as possible, which is really challenging because how do you appeal to parents and academics and PhDs and professors and, education administrators and activists all at the same time? Right. I will say, I think there's a piece in here for activists who I am also hearing more and more are trying to figure out how to engage mixed race youth, because they're kind of the upcoming cohort, and we want that movement to keep going, and no one's quite sure what to do at this point, so we're still... We need more text, and we need more reference points and just cornerstones to this work.
So from a
professor side of things, I do have a question about how you analyzed your data. Because and did you interview them all together or separately, and how did that influence? Those were some things I didn't quite read, but I know you did, so I wanted you to.
Right. Well, in a perfect world, I would have interviewed them all in the same, right? Like, as a scientist, you would interview every person in the same room, in the same way, with
right.
the same set of questions. But in reality, people are human, and so I didn't want to lose anybody's stories because I was being too rigid, trying to control things. So most of the interviews were single, were individuals. A few people weren't available to do that, and I wasn't going to be able to talk to both parents unless I could do a joint interview. And in those moments, I had to say to myself, well, do I want to lose a voice, or do I want to get both voices? So there are a handful that were joint interviews where partners were together, and that actually ended up being interesting because I could observe a dynamic between the two of them around race that I wouldn't have seen if they were interviewing individually. So I traveled to their homes to interview mostly. Because it was private and it was about their children, I recommended that to them, and I think maybe one or two people came to my home. So it's just trying to keep it as comfortable as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then 68 parents, I told you were curious about how I found them, maybe?
No, your analyzation. How did you analyze all the data? Did you audio record the interviews? Did you, and then once you had all that information, did you transcribe? Did you use some type of the process part?
Yes, I recorded them all on my phone.
Okay. Don't we love modern technology?
Like, in the old days, you'd go into the field, you'd use like a reel-to-reel and have a microphone, and it'd be so difficult. And so that made that easier, right? Recorded everybody on the phone, transcribed every single interview, almost entirely word for word, including sometimes parenthetically putting in emotions or reactions because I wanted to get all that stuff in there too. So I think when I was done, I had over 800 pages of transcription.
Wow.
It took probably 5 to 6 months to transcribe everything. Wow. And then I went in and I coded. So I created, different key themes and words, and I coded each section of interviews into those themes.
Yeah.
And then they were ready to write in the book. And of course, then I backed it up with other people's studies and research, and that's how I spun the book. And I pulled out the themes that came up in the interviews to create the themes in the book, right? So that I had my own ideas going in. Oh, I think this is going to come up. I think this is going to come up. But I really used people's stories and narratives to center my analysis.
Yeah, fabulous.
Do you have other researcher questions?
Oh. Yeah. So I am like a year.
Shaking her hand.
Yeah. Well, I'm a year out from my PhD, and I'm very big into qualitative research, and I did videography. So I'm very curious about how other people do it and their methods. So.
Yeah.
And I also think from an activist side, when people are trying to get, stories and information out there, they also are doing research to back that up. And so that's important for them to know how the information was collected and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to ask you so that we can share that information because it's really good stuff. It really is.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And I just want to emphasize again how powerful I think people's stories are, and that the art of interviewing someone so they feel comfortable enough to share with you their story, I think it cannot be underestimated, right?
I agree.
And that they're comfortable enough that they want to tell you, they trust you.
Yeah.
There's more data probably in a 30-minute interview than you could ever get from a survey or any kind of other quantitative, millions of other quantitative methods you could use. So rich.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've learned more from interviewing people than I have from anything I've ever read. So
yeah, definitely. One other question I had before we get into some of the topics that came up is what was the wealth and economic influence of your participants? Were they all middle class? Were there difference? And did you find different maybe themes based on any differences in those economic differences?
They were almost all entirely middle to upper income, did not represent working class except maybe in a couple cases for this particular study. So I would say a class analysis in this book is not strong. the stronger piece here is the child-centered piece and the race and the mixed race theory. I think a lot of that had to do with my recruitment method. I used parent listservs, so sometimes Craigslist, but some of the more local ones, whether they were through Yahoo or through other social media networks. And if you think about who has access to the internet, right? And even if they do, who's fluent or super comfortable on the internet, what kind of parents are going to be accessing those listservs anyways? Who has the time? A lot of the listservs in this area are used to do things like set up play dates or, advertise fun preschool or alternative preschool programs, like all of that stuff. We don't even need to say which demographic that's appealing, right? And so also there's the snowballing piece where when I'd interview one family, they'd say, you should definitely talk to this family, right? And who are they more likely to be friends with? Yeah. So I would love to see someone else do a project that encompasses a wider income demographic. I would love to see if the themes in this book are similar in working class families, refugee families, immigrant families. That's definitely something that needs to be looked into more.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump in.
To insert there.
Yes.
And this is something else I would love to see somebody look into. I can't confirm, but I have been anecdotally told by people that they feel mixed race families are more common in middle to upper income brackets. And I don't know do you know if that's true?
So I've done a lot of research on interracial marriages, and interracial marriages, which produce mixed race children, are actually more common in middle and upper class because of the education. They always link it to education, and that education being more open-minded, though we know that being more educated doesn't necessarily mean more open-minded, but you're also in places with different. So with the increase of people of color getting educated, it's correlated with the increase of interracial marriages, which is interesting. So yes.
Kind of like maybe paradox in my book where we don't want to be classist at the same time that these parents probably represent predominantly the parents of mixed race children right now in the United States, so it's sort of maybe accurate in that way. I don't know. Needs more exploring.
Yes.
Researchers do it.
Yes, I agree. Yes.